And a very good evening to you. Welcome to Politics 101 Midweek Edition. David Hinds here, of course, with you, uh, welcoming you onto the program, wherever you are, whether you are in Guyana or you are further afield in the diaspora, those of you who are in North America. You just, the United States, just coming off the Labor Day weekend, I noticed lots of celebrations there for the weekend. It's traditional. Mass in Brooklyn and the whole Calypso by the Mighty Sparrow. Welcome to Politics 101. William is joining us from Toronto. Lots of people from Toronto drive over to Brooklyn for the Labor Day weekend. Of course, it was curtailed because of the pandemic, but this year things seem to have gotten back to normal. I saw some of our friends, Politics 101 friends, really having lots of picnics. I saw some house or block picnics. Like in the very old days when you would go to Brooklyn for Labor Day weekend, there was lots of that. And then, of course, you would have had the big parade. I'm not sure whether you had the big parade. I did see Rickford Burke organize a Guyana band or truck. It is, but people seem to have had a lovely time this year at Labor Day. Labor Day in Brooklyn. Welcome, all you Brooklynites, down to Politics 101 this evening. Welcome those of you who are joining us from Canada, Toronto. Welcome the Ontario province. Welcome all of you down to Politics 101. Tonight we're going to be talking economics. We have Elson from the APNU/PNC, who's coming here tonight for us to talk about that $1.1 billion and what that entails for us going forward. Henry Jeffrey and GHK Lal weighed in on it last night from the political standpoint. This evening, we're going to get the economist take on it. We're going to get Mr. Lowe to talk to us a little bit about how they've been spending the first set of money, second set of money, because I think there are two drawdowns from the Natural Resource Fund. And now they're getting 1.1 billion US dollars. That's more money than we think it is. Good evening, Lynette from Brooklyn. I noticed you had a block party, Lynette. And you all were having lots of time. If I were there in Brooklyn, that's one of the block parties I would have certainly had to touch down on because you all are my people. Good evening to you, Denise. None of my people. You all Buxtonians, are all over Clyde McPherson. Good evening to you, Sister Rhonda. And we didn't get to Denham still. But I understand that there are some activities there that Rhonda related. They're doing some roads, but they're really not roads. You know, after all the talk about the roads in the different communities and the fact that the government has not been looking after roads in the opposition communities or opposition supported communities. We saw, I think it was on the Department of Public Information, the big media. I didn't see it there, I'm sure. I'm sure it was a DPI, where Vice President Jack Dio announcing that they're going to do 4,000 community roads, as he referred to them. I suppose these are roads in the communities, and he said they'd been spending money in looking after the main roads. Now they're going to go into the community roads. It was buried there in the Department of Public Information, DPI. And like I said, the big daily newspapers, I don't think they picked it up. But there it was, because they're responding to pressure from us. And if they're going to do 4,000 roads, we are now waiting. We are now waiting. Where these roads are going to be done, which roads, which communities, how many roads per communities? Are they going to be done simultaneously, or some are going to be done first, some are going to be done last? Are they going to be done by the same standard, or are we going to push that crush thing in some communities and other communities? So now we've gotten them to address the issue of roads. We now have to see if they're going to be doing so, equitably. So tonight we're going to talk about how they've been spending this money. The first two drawdown from the Natural Resource Fund, or oil money. And then we're going to talk about this bonanza. $1.1 billion they're expected. They're also projecting that the economy is going to grow, I think, by 8% in the next quarter, or the next half of the year, because they were given a half-yearly report. We're going to be getting into that. And if we have time, we're going to get Mr. Lowe to tell, because you see, economists deal a lot with numbers, numbers. Developmental economists deal with what's behind the numbers. So we're going to try to get some numbers from young Lowe, and then ask him what lies behind the numbers. They've been all this talk recently about proving the apartheid state. And I think it was Brother Nigel Hughes on this very program gave us some numbers on what the budget, and I remember young Elson Lowe was going to be on tonight. So share the link, and others who were on earlier in the year when the budget had just come out. And they were telling us about the numbers, how much money was being spent in Region 1, Region 2, Region 3, Region 4, right through to Region 10. And what we had noticed is that in the regions that are controlled by the APNU AFC, there was a reduction in the monies set aside for those regions. And these are big regions. Region 4, for example, got a steep reduction. And then we saw the regions controlled by the PPP coming through from Region 1, steep increases. And we were looking at it from an opposition/government control. And what Nigel Hughes was saying, you translate that to who live in those regions, who live in the regions that got increases, and who live in the region that got decreases. Welcome to Politics 101. Please share the link. We are moving a little bit slow tonight in sharing the link. I can't do Sherrod, but you all imagine that Sherrod was on a share the link ban. Share the link so that everyone knows that Politics 101 is on tonight. And we are dealing tonight with money. $1.1 billion. lots of money. I was making the point this morning on the Buxtonian Morning Time that the question of wages for public servants, one caller wanted to know why the opposition is not putting more emphasis on that. And I was making the point that all governments in the past have been guilty of not paying a living wage to public servants. But the excuse past governments would have had was that there was not enough money to share around. That paying public servants is one responsibility, one of the many responsibilities of the government. And so when the government had to distribute monies all around, they could have argued with some justification that public servants could not be paid more. They don't have that excuse now. The pie is larger. The pie has been enlarged. I'm going to try to get Mr. Lowe to weigh in on that. There was also the issue of inflation. If government, there's too much money circulating, match up against other factors, we could have inflation. And I was making the point, you know, the public servant in the morning, getting up to go to work, he or she got a bathe. The ladies have to put on their makeup, they have to dress nice, cost money. They can't go to work stink, they got a bathe, cost money. Family has 2 little children, they got to send them to daycare, cost money. They got to pay transportation to get to work, cost money. If they have their own car, they got to buy gas, wear and tear on tires, etc., cost money. They got to carry food to work, cost money. If they don't carry food, they got to buy food, cost money. And that when you add up how much money per day the civil servant has to pay to prepare himself or herself for work, it is much more than the wages they're given per day. Deficit. If you're a civil servant, I made the point again. The civil servant has to dress a certain way. They have to make a certain presentation. Other categories of workers don't have the same burden in preparing themselves for work. And so the issue of public service wages, public servants' wages, is important. So please share the link, sisters and brothers. Sisters and brothers, Politics 101 is on tonight. I think Rashley Jackson was laid to rest today. Our condolences go out to his party, his family, and all those who were close to him. I am not sure if Sister Noel Meniz has been buried yet. She's a Catholic nun, a well-known historian. Our condolences, of course, go out to the families of those 2 children of our Guyana. Welcome to Politics 101. Please share the link. It's going a little bit slowly tonight. Please share the link. Let me bring in Mr. Elson Lowe, and let's begin the conversation. Mr. Lowe,
Hi,
good
good
evening.
night, good night. Thank you for having me.
And how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good.
Interesting times, so an interesting discussion.
Thank you much. Did you have a chance to go by the rally this weekend at Golden Grove?
Yes, I did. I did. Very stirring speeches there. I thought that they hit on a lot of the core issues, which many of which are tied around inequality in our society and tied around the question of whether that is going to grow as our country develops and whether that is an acceptable state of affairs. Inequality has already really escalated in Guyana, and I'm very concerned that it will continue to escalate.
Mr. Lowe, let me start off by saying when I did lots of work on ethnic studies, which I still do, but at the height of studies and advocacy on ethnic inequalities and how to reduce the possibility of ethnic conflict. There was a theory that came mostly from economists, which is that if you enlarge the economic pie, then the possibility of ethnic conflict would decrease. I'm sure as an economist, you would be familiar with that theory or theorization. And I was asking the political scientists last night, and I myself was reflecting on it. Why, now that the economic pie in Guyana has been enlarged, if we follow that theory, then the possibility of ethnic conflict would have decreased. But we are seeing the opposite, um, rather than what the theory suggests. And I want you, first of all, to reflect on the theory of the enlarged pie as a means towards ending the conflict, and then to reflect why we are not seeing that outcome in Guyana from your standpoint. I hope it's not a
No,
difficult question that I'm throwing at you, but I think it is at the core of what we are experiencing in Guyana. Yeah.
sure, sure. Well, I won't, or at least I'm not talked about much as being a political scientist, but that's also what I have a degree in. And what I think you're referring to, or at least where I think a lot of this is based, is the debate around the growth of China. Now, that is a situation where you had massive amounts of growth, and as a result of the massive amounts of growth, a period of great stability in China and of great wealth creation, of rising wages, of many billionaires being created, and so on. And so the argument has been that if you can grow the economy substantially, you'll be able to avoid a lot of the conflicts that you might have where there is an unequal economy that is also not growing. Now, that assumes a couple of things. One is obviously that China is, relative to many other countries, ethnically quite homogenous. That's one fair point. But there's also the real question of the rise in wages. And China, over the course of the time that it was able to really grow and expand its development, a 20, 30-year period, China moved hundreds and hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. So they were able to really grow people's incomes and help to alleviate a lot of those stresses. The difference in Guyana is that, first of all, of course, we acknowledge that there's ethnic diversity, so that's one element. But really, I think what is causing a lot of these concerns, a lot of this tension, a lot of the anxieties across the board is that we have not seen wages rise particularly substantially. And at the same time, we've seen the cost of living rise very quickly. And so the standard of living of the average person, whereas it was going up in China very quickly, it's been quite the opposite here in Guyana, where people are definitely much worse off than they were only a couple of years ago. Meanwhile, the actual economy has been booming because of the oil sector. So what that has meant is that you've gotten a sharp increase in inequality without the benefits that some would say that you can get from some inequality, which is growth and wage growth and more employment. So we've got a lot of the negatives without getting the positives, and that's why there's, I think, a lot of tension in the society. One of the things that I like to stress is that because the government is the primary recipient of the direct recipient, at least, of oil revenues, the government will, whatever government, whoever's in power, will face a real fundamental question, which is how do you distribute resources in such a way that you ensure equity, but you also are able to grow the economy? That's pretty much the fundamental question that must be answered, because if you don't do that, then only a small group that's connected to the business of oil will benefit and the broader population will punish. Sadly, that's the way that the current budgets have been structured, and that's what we're seeing in Guyana right now, which is why there's a feeling of hopelessness, I think.
A feeling of hopelessness and the theory of the enlarged pie really aiding and abetting alleviation of conflict in the society has not been borne out here. I played around this morning with what I call the hidden hand. That one of the reasons is that in Guyana there's the hidden hand, and I know you economists like to talk about the hidden hand of the market. Here I was talking about the hidden hand of a government that has an agenda of ethnic domination. And it is that agenda that is obviously based on a worldview of in unequal citizenship, unequal humanity. So that hidden hand of a government with an ethnic agenda, I think, mitigates against the confluence of forces that would come together in a society that has an enlarged pie, and that if there was the enlarged pie and an agenda of equality, we may have seen an opposite outcome. But because, yes, we have the enlarged pie, but a government with an agenda of domination, that, to my mind, is what has contributed towards the outcome that we have, which is a lack of quality in the way the wages, in the way the resources are distributed, hence conflict rather than a decrease in conflict. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, that is a very valid concern. Given Guyana's history of ethnic tension, it's a very valid concern. There are other countries that have had difficulties around ethnic lines when it comes to resources. The one of the countries that's mentioned that Guyana is compared to, and which is a not a good country to be compared to, is Equatorial Guinea, where you have a particular tribe that has been in charge of that country for some time, and is other tribes are not able to access as much resources as that particular group. Of course, in that country, it's exacerbated by the fact that that particular tribe lives on an island where the capital is, and whereas the rest of the population, the majority of the population, lives on the mainland. So that's a particular structure that's unique to them. But I think that there may be some who believe that you can replicate that kind of a system here in Guyana, where only a small group benefit and the broader population is not able to. I would describe that as painfully naive. And I think that Guyana is a country where, with strong advocacy, we can see substantial change. I also want to make sure that it is, I think, very clear to people that you see one or two cash grants here or there, but you don't see the large scale, substantial relief measures to help every Guyanese, irrespective of race, irrespective of religion. And that to me indicates that you've got a group at the top which is hell bent on keeping as much as they can. You've got a party that's hell bent that on keeping as much as it can for itself. And if you are a poor Indian person, as they say, I think that it would be very naive to think that the the PUP is going to be your savior. Of course, I don't subscribe to the view that just because of your ethnicity, you're going to vote for a particular party. But I think that if people are relying upon that framework, they will be they will be left very disappointed. As an example, I give you a basic example. The amounts that have been put towards cost of living mitigation in the original budget is less than 1%, $5 billion of a $552 billion budget, less than 1% of that. Then you had a supplemental, you had a whole war in Ukraine that sent prices right through the roof. We can all recall that. You know what they provided in the new supplemental for cost of living mitigation? Nothing. So they passed a $44 billion supplemental on cost of living mitigation. Nothing there. So that is a decision, that is a deliberate choice that has affected Guyanese across the board. And so I think that it would be very unfortunate if people think that just because of a perceived ethnic bias, you're going to benefit under the PUP. I think that's naive, and I think really what's going to happen is PUP is going to try to steal as much of this money as they can over the course of the next little period.
There you have it, Mr. Elson Lowe, economist and the economic spokesperson for the APNU AFC. Are you in Parliament, Elson?
No, I am not. I am not.
You're not in Parliament. And as I look on the opposition side, and I'm being quite objective here, I can't see, and you don't have to comment on it, it's my observation. I can't see how in these times, given all that is happening, that we have 31 parliamentarians on the opposition side, and we don't have a trained economist. I think it's a travesty that has to be corrected. I know when the parliamentarians were being picked, the objective and the reasoning behind it. I know what occurred 2 years ago and what that moment meant, and so on and so forth. But I think after 2 years, it's a minor, if not a major crime, to not have a trained parliamentarian, a trained economist in our parliament. I would say we need not just one, we need 2, 3, but at least we need one. At this morning's Skytro News, top story, government mid-year report confirms presence of Dutch disease in Guyana as oil sector accounts for 54.9% of total GDP. And they're quoting from Elson Lowe, who said that the half-yearly report, it indicated that the Dutch disease is already here. The fall in sugar, rice, fish, and gold production, as well as a reduction in manufacturing output. What this means is that the non-oil sectors are not performing. Elson?
Yes. Well,
this is not.
Let me make a.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead. I was about to say, we're not dealing here with high school economics. We are dealing here with economics in a country that is slated to become one of the richest countries in the world. And we've been warned about these diseases. We've been warned about depending too much on one sector. Let me read. You were saying that there is a decline in sugar. Money given to sugar workers, $250,000. Yet there's a decline in sugar. There's a decline in rice. Money is given to farmers because there was disaster. Decline in fish. Money thrown at fisher folk. Decline in gold. Are we noticing some willful sabotage of our economic growth in the non-oil sector. Over to you.
Well, the first thing I want to mention, just to back it up a second, is that I believe that MP Finance has an economic background. So I didn't want to let that go by. And I am, of course, trying as the economic advisor to lead the opposition to provide that advice as best I can. But that apart, we do have a very worrisome situation when it comes to the non-oil economy, at least when it comes to many of the traditional industries. There are some industries that have done okay, such as timber and so on. That's fine. But we have a wide range of traditional industries, such as the fisheries industry, such as sugar, such as rice, such as the gold mining, such as manufacturing. It's too many industries for us not to be concerned. And the reason that I really want people to kind of get a good understanding of why they themselves should look at this closely is, let's imagine for a moment. Let's just imagine for a moment that Guyana didn't have oil. Wouldn't you be concerned to see a decline of 50 something percent in sugar and 20 something percent in another area and 20 something percent in another area and 11% in another area? It would be concerning. I think that the fact that the government has allowed all of this to kind of happen without taking strident action to right a course to correct this, I think that is really what concerns me when it comes to Dutch disease. Dutch disease is not just direct and active, uh, 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 you know, a dependency on oil or another resource destroying your other industries. It can also come from focusing on oil and neglecting other industries. You have countries like Venezuela where, yes, there were efforts by previous regimes to actually undermine the private sector. So, yes, that was a factor while they focused on oil. But there's also, I think, just a simple neglect. And I'm a bit concerned that the PvP has neglected a lot of these other industries, and that's why you're seeing widespread problems. Widespread problems. I would have expected a much more aggressive response by the government, having passed such a large budget regarding these other areas, but that's not what we've seen. I would have expected them, as an example, when it comes to Gaisuko. You mentioned Gaisuko. I would have expected them to take much more aggressive action much earlier to try and shore up Gaisuko. Instead, they have allowed Gaisuko to have, first of all, a revision down. So the expectation for this year was revised down by about 30%. So they expected 30% less production from Gaisuko. And from that already low base, we then saw an additional fall of over 50%. I am very concerned that the government has allowed Gaisuko to continue to underperform. I believe that that is an area that is really due to Dutch disease. I think that if we didn't have oil, I believe that the government would have reacted in a completely different way to what is going on at Gaisuko. I think that Gaisuko workers, as a result, must be very, very concerned as to what the government's plans are for Gaisuko. And they have to remain very alert. We in the opposition will be putting together comprehensive plans to deal with the Gaisuko and ensure that Gaisuko workers are able to get good paying jobs that are sustainable, where they do not have to always be worried about whether or not the corporation will find itself in some problem and not be able to move forward or find itself under pressure. We're going to make sure that Gaisuko is dealt with the way that it needs to be dealt with so that we can see there's some real benefits going forward, both for the workers and for the country. And yeah, I point to former President Ramatar, who actually, so it's not coming from the coalition side, who actually expressed a little bit of concern about the PVP's efforts to turn around the sugar industry. And he was not convinced, at least it seems to me, he was not convinced of the seriousness of the PVP regarding actually trying to do anything for Gaisuko. And again, I would indicate I am pretty surprised that the government has allowed the Gaisuko crisis to go on for so long. That is very concerning. So, from that perspective, what you're seeing is A real decline in a wide range of sectors. You've seen fisheries fall. The government has not been able to find a way for fishermen to be able to access the same areas that they would have liked to access before, whether that's through agreements with Suriname, whether that's through agreements with Exxon. It hasn't been able to do that. And I think that this again would be a far more serious situation if we didn't have oil. But the government has kind of passed it off as not a big deal, whereas it is indeed a big deal. So the oil and gas industry's growth is providing a bit of a mask. But we must recall, and this is the other side of it that is so important, we must recall that the oil and gas industry is very, very volatile. We could have another variant of COVID tomorrow. I mean, I don't know, and that could drop the oil price down to zero. So we cannot depend entirely upon this one industry, but rather we must look to continually diversify and to build other industries, to build the productivity of those industries, to build the overall amount that they produce, the production, but also the productivity, so that we are able to get good tax revenues, good profits, create good jobs. I think that focusing only on oil to the neglect of the other industries is a problem, and I think that that is really what you're seeing right now. Well, as the show continues to roll on, I believe that some of these comments actually were echoed by previous finance minister several weeks ago, and so you're seeing it not just from me, but come from coalition more broadly, and then come from former finance ministers. And I think that does show that there's a real concern. I've actually seen today some of what was in the budget speech before, when at the beginning of the year, in terms of expectations for growth in all of these areas, expectations for growth across the board in all the different industries, in your fisheries, in your rice, in your sugar, in your manufacturing. There was all these rosy, or at least stable expectations, but at the half year mark, pretty much everything is below what was anticipated. And given that it's below what is anticipated, you have to ask whether the government's plans were effective plans, whether the PUP's plans were the right plans, and why it is that everything has gone so terribly wrong. That is the question I think citizens must ask themselves. So that is that's what's going on as it regards the Dutch disease question. And just so your viewers are clearer on what Dutch disease is, because of course it's something that you don't hear of every day. It is when a country becomes dependent on one particular resource or one particular area of its economy, and that causes other areas to decline. In particular, it was usually related to things like oil, and it features the movement of labor away from the other sectors of the economy to that particular productive sector. So whether it's oil, movement towards oil, and in the course of that, you see those other sectors decline. You also will see, though, a focus, whether it's a government focus, whether it's a national focus, away from the other areas, and a focus instead of just on oil, or let's say natural gas or something. And that, of course, leads to a serious long-term problem. Again, let's recall that oil is volatile. So if you focus entirely on that and you have a price drop, a substantial price drop, what will happen is that you'll find yourself in immediate economic problems. Actually, what happened next door in Venezuela is that they suffered very severely from Dutch disease. They focused almost entirely on the oil and gas industry, even to the neglecting other industries that are related, such as petrochemicals. But they focused entirely just on the production of oil. And in doing so, in focusing entirely on the production of oil, what they ended up being is totally dependent upon oil. And so when the oil price fell in the 2014 period and remained low for several years, they were not able to adequately finance their budget. This caused a severe recession. the most severe recession that has been seen outside of an active war zone. And as a result of that, you had a really terrible situation develop in Venezuela. Of course, we know that many Venezuelan migrants have come over to Guyana as a result of that. So, as a result of Dutch disease, they've come over to Guyana, had to move over to Guyana. But in addition, Venezuelans have reported that they've moved from eating 3 meals a day to 2 meals a day. And I think there's a report that the average Venezuelan has lost weight over the course of this crisis. That's how serious their food crisis, their economic crisis, their wage crisis has been, all as a result of suffering from Dutch disease. So that is, I think, very, very concerning, and is something that your viewers should certainly keep an eye on. But of course, this is all against the backdrop. This is all against the backdrop of a circumstance in which Guyana is making a lot of money from oil, and in which we're seeing very high inflation and high prices. So as much as on the one hand you're benefiting from oil, on the other hand you're not keeping the industries going that are your backup. And on top of that, now you've got a cost of living crisis that is very, very significant. And this cost of living crisis, we one of the things we highlighted yesterday in the press conference was that really, the if you look at prices, the change in prices, especially for food, from 2020, December 2020, and if you look at it on the most of the PVP's time in office, you to this Christmas, from Christmas 2020 to Christmas 2022, you're looking at something like 25% overall increase in prices. 25% overall increase in prices. Now, I don't know if viewers have all had their salaries increased by 25% during that time period. But if you have not, then that's one of the, especially when it comes to food, you'll have less purchasing power. You can purchase less food than you would have otherwise been able to purchase, which is not at all what I think anybody expected. You'll recall that I just mentioned that in Venezuela, people were eating fewer meals and so on. But it was reported, I think it's the POW or FAO maybe, a multilateral organization had reported recently that Guyanese had started to cut back on meals in order to try and stave off the cost of living crisis. So that sounds exactly like it is in Venezuela. Now, I'm not saying that it's anywhere near as severe as it is in Venezuela. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that there is no scenario in which, there is no world in which Guyanese should be worried about feeding themselves when we've got so much being produced. This $1.1 billion of oil revenue, nearly 60% growth expected this year. There's no way that Guyanese should even be thinking about not being able to afford food. That is the height of absurdity. In Venezuela, they were facing a very severe recession. Are we facing a severe recession here? No. So if we're not facing a severe recession, why is the government allowing people to be so food insecure, to be so concerned about their daily ability to get something to eat? That's, I think, totally unacceptable. I think it is cruel. I think it is worrisome. I think it bodes it sends a very, paints a very negative picture for what we can expect in the future. And I think that much more needs to be done. You of course mentioned that public servant raises is an important area, and I completely agree. We mentioned in our press conference that given that you're seeing food prices go up so much, a public servant salary increase that's not more than 20 to 25% at the end of this year would not cut it. You need to have a substantial raise. We have even called for a raise of 10% now, and then a further raise to be negotiated with the public servant unions by the end of the year. Those, of course, have cries that have gone on deaf ears because, as I indicated, the government has not shown any inclination to be willing to help those who need help in these current circumstances. They're happy to just allow things to go on by. Dr. Hinds, I'm glad to have you back. I guess you had an interruption there.
No. I was here and listening to you all the time. Uh, uh, Let me say that you keep asking the question, and you're right to ask the question. why in the circumstances is this happening? And I go back to my argument that I do not believe government is mad. I don't believe the PPP is mad. I don't believe the people in the PPP's leadership are mad. I do believe that they have an agenda. As they say, they are rolling out their manifesto. They've made promises in the manifesto, and they are going to deliver on the promises of the manifesto. It means, therefore, rather than looking at the country and looking at the needs of the country, because needs change over time, sometimes over months, sometimes over years, sometimes, as in the present world situation, it changes sometimes every week. It's fluid. If in the face of the fluidity in the global economy, in the regional economy, in the national economy, you still hold on to your manifesto, you're bound to crash the car. Right? And the PPP, I think, doesn't mind the car being crashed so long as it delivers on its agenda. And we have established that its agenda is grounded in dominance, in strengthening the sectors of the economy, especially at the level of businesses, to empower its supporters in those brackets. Let me read the numbers here, Elson, before we go on. This is the mid-year sector share of the GDP. Agriculture, 11.8%. Mining and quarrying, 59.9%, that's 60%. Of that mining and quarrying share of 59.9%, 54.9% is on petroleum and gas. So take away the oil from the mining and quarrying. Mining and quarrying represents 5% of the GDP. Manufacturing, 2.3%. Electricity supply, 0.2%. Water supply, 0.1%. Construction, 4.2%. Construction, 4.2%. Services, 19.0%. So 60% of the GDP is oil and gas. And I keep saying, the government is telling us what a wonderful job it's doing in agriculture. What a wonderful job it's doing at growing the economy. If your economy is dependent on oil and gas, and oil and gas is just a recent addition to our national economy, and that national economy that existed before oil and gas only represents 40% of your GDP, means that you are doing terrible. That had it not been for God, because if we consider oil and gas an act of God in putting oil and gas at our front door, and that we are able to exploit it. And when you take into consideration that the oil companies have taken away the vast majority of our take, and so this small amount that we get as our take represents 60% of the growth in GDP. We are an economic failure. We are an economic failure under the PPP. And while these sections, these sectors of the economy are tanking, the government is throwing money at the workers in the agriculture sector, in the fishing sector. These are sectors that are underperforming. Sugar accounts for 0.1%. Rice accounts for 2.0%. My viewers, my listeners, they always say Dr. Hinds preaches racial sermon. Well, tonight I'm preaching economic sermon along with my young body here. All hear those figures. The government is pelting money at the workers, but the sector has declined rapidly. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, you make a good point. You make a good point there that the focus is on these little handouts rather than on ensuring that the sectors are able to perform, continue to perform, and are built to continue to do better in the future because we want to have other strong industries across Guyana. So that I think is a very valid point. It's not going to be enough to just put band-aids here and there, because what will happen is those industries will eventually disappear if all you're doing is putting band-aids and not ensuring that they're productive and profitable and growing. So that I think is very much in order. But the other thing that I want to help Guyanese to understand is, as much as oil is 60% of the Guyanese economy right now, we are at the beginning, the early stages of the oil boom. And it is not inconceivable that Guyana will produce more than 2 million barrels of oil per day, which will mean that the economy will be, I don't know, what, 99, 98% oil. That is something we need to consider deeply, because what it means, and this is what we've stressed as an opposition, what I've said repeatedly, it is a fiction that Guyana is a poor country. Guyana is a rich country where the government has decided not to help the average person. That is what is going on. There, Norway is producing around 2 million barrels of oil, but Norway has far more people than Guyana. Guyana has a very small population. Trinidad at their peak produced 280, 250,000 barrels of oil per day. But we are currently producing way more than that, way more. And we will produce far, far, far more than that. So one of the things we as young people say is, broke thinking got a left behind. If they think that they can come here with a 20,000 and a 50,000 and anybody's going to buy that, that is not going to be acceptable. We are operating on an entirely different level as an opposition when it comes to what we believe needs to happen, the things Guyanese need to get, and the way that the economy needs to be structured. And that cash grant half mentality is not going to cut it. Of course, if they're giving you the grants, collect them, because it's your money that they're spending. It's not PPP's money. It's your money. So collect the grants. But understand that broke thinking, which is what the PPP has, broke thinking and a broke mentality, is
Yes.
not appropriate. This is a rich country, and we're going to ensure that everyone here is comfortable, is given the best possible opportunities, can access as far as possible a high paying job, receives training to be able to access those jobs, and is able to hold their head high, feeling that they are well treated in their society. That is not, to my mind, the way that the PPP envisions the future. The PPP envisions. They envision a
Vision.
future where they can steal as much as possible and kind of make off. I don't know if they're gonna buy houses in Miami or something, but that's the future they envision, and it is one where Guyanese will not be able to move forward. So when they come with this 20,000 and 50,000 gaff, I find it, I have to admit, quite amusing.
And when they come with that little freck, and I want to say, Mr. Lowe, you're not responsible for my statement, but I want to say to African Guyanese, I want to say, listen to these numbers. Sugar, 0.1%. Rice, 2.0%. Fishing, 0.7%. That's their share of the economy. And the government has been pelting relatively big money in terms of what they call grants at these sectors, the workers in these sectors, but the sectors are not growing. If they come and pelt $20,000 at you, do you believe you can develop? I was listening to the Guyana Critic program, and some PPP-oriented Black people were criticizing me. and saying David Hinds needs to stop advocating for Black people. He doesn't speak for me. And that what we want is progress. Progress. And this government is giving us progress. But they're giving tens of thousands of dollars to people in those sectors and they're not growing the sectors. It means that those people are not guaranteed security because the sectors are not growing. All right? And they're giving you $20,000 and $30,000 and you talk for progress. Look, if you are that type of people, David Hinds don't want to speak for you. Because you are stupid. If you're not paying attention to see that your brother workers are getting much more than you, but that's not growing the sector. The sector is declining, which means their security as workers is declining. All right, it's tenuous, right? And when a couple of these guys were asked, where you working? I'm working in the ministry. When you're a public servant, what is your security when you are getting much less? You stupid. Because if you don't understand, helping money at you in the form of cash grants does not lead to development, either the personal level or for the sector that you are part of. Something is wrong with your head. So no, David Hinds does not speak for you. Get that in your head. Brother Elson, the government has made some projections going forward. And the thing that jumped out of me, $1.1 billion expected. First of all, why the steep increase? And having answered that, given what we have laid out with the mismanagement of the first and the second drawdown, now that there is a bigger pie in there, what is likely to happen?
Yes, well, I think the thing to note about this substantial amount is that first of all, yes, we've got more production, more barrels of oil pumped, but really, we have to really give some thought to the fact that the war in Ukraine has sent oil prices through the roof, and they've been sustained above or around about $100 a barrel for pretty much the entire year, or a vast majority of a substantial portion of the year. So we've had very high oil prices. In fact, the Bank of Guyana report details that it is about 33%, about a third more oil revenue than was expected. So it is really, on the one hand, yes, you've seen prices go through the roof for food and for this and so on because of the war in Ukraine, at least partly, yes. So you've seen that. But we have also benefited from these high oil prices to the tune of about a third more than we were expecting. Last year, the oil price was expected to be around $75, $75 a barrel over the course of the year. It has been far higher than that throughout the entire year. It's been far higher than that. And so what we have seen is a real bump up. But, and this is what makes the situation seem so ridiculous, you're not seeing any of that money make its way to people to provide them with any kind of substantial relief. How can you have a country benefit where they're getting a third more oil revenue, hundreds and hundreds of millions of US, more than we expected? So this is money that we didn't even realize we were going to get. And you're going to come here and tell us that you're not even going to put a percent to the national budget to cost of living mitigation. And then you're going to bring a supplemental and put nothing for cost of living mitigation in that supplemental. I wondered to myself, the PPP is crazy. That is unbelievable and totally unacceptable. As a result, Guyanese are punishing over the course of the year for no reason. And I want Guyanese to understand this. There is no reason that you are punishing. It is a deliberate choice by the government to let you punish. That is what is going on. Because over and above what was expected, we got 33% more oil revenue because of that war and because of the shock that produced. So there's money there. But if the government just decides that they don't care, then the government decides that they don't care.
Because we don't care. You know, I'm not a numbers man, but you said the cost of living went up by about 25%. And then you say we got more, we got about one third more from oil. So that's 33%. So given the rate of rise in oil prices, it is about the same rate in the rise of cost of living. So if we take that extra money, and this is what Mary was saying, you don't even have to go into what you expect. You just have to take the extra money that you get. That can take care of dealing, mitigating the rising prices and rising cost of living and bring things back to equilibrium, to economic equilibrium. And you are not doing that. You're either visionless or you're scams. And I suspect it's a combination of the two. A combination of the two. You're visionless and you're a scam. The government is made up of a bunch of scams, and scampishness and vision don't go together. They do not go together. Elson, what are they going to do with all this money if they're not doing the basic things, like dealing with the question of poverty, alleviating poverty? It is, and we have the chance to do that at this juncture. The war is going on and so on. Yes, it hits us on the front end in terms of prices and cost of living, but at the end, we are drawing down. We have inherited this burden of poverty from colonialism. We have not been able to beat it. We have put dents in it over the years, but we've not been able to beat it. Am I wrong to think that if we have a visionary government that is concerned about poverty as the root of a lot of the other ailments in the society, that now is perhaps the best time to wipe poverty off most of our face, if not all of our face?
Yes, well, I believe that the anti-poverty measures that we've talked about in the coalition are doable right now. I believe that, and I give you a simple example. As much as I understand that it's some people are happy to get a little work to get a 40,000 for the part-time job, and we're happy to see people benefit and so on. I would say this: it's transparently obvious that you should have just given those people 40,000 as a stipend and send them to a training program, so that later on they can get a higher paying job. So I would describe the government's decision to do that as stupid. And I think it's indicative of a broader trend where they're not thinking creatively about what can be done with our monies. We have talked about student stipends. We have talked about free G. We have talked about salary top ups. We have talked about a minimum livable income. The reason that we're structuring these programs in this way is because we want, number one, to alleviate poverty, but number two, to give people opportunities so that they can earn high wage jobs. We know that the oil and gas industry will generate direct jobs and spin off jobs. But if we do not train our people to take up those jobs, then foreigners will come and take the jobs, and Guyanese will be left doing the unskilled labor, which is the low paying jobs. It is unacceptable. And in my humble opinion, Chetty, Burnham, every founder leader we've ever had would be turned over in their grave if we allow that to happen after all of those independent struggles.
We have the fight on our hands at all levels. And it is, we are lucky in that whatever you say about poor people in Guyana, they still have a healthy respect for education, that they invest in people like young Elson Lowe, in what we call getting an education so that they can come back and put their knowledge and wisdom at the service of our people, in teasing out things for us, getting behind numbers, getting behind wild talk. If you listen to the government, you will think sugar is doing well, thank you. Rice is doing well, thank you. The economy is doing wonderfully well, thank you. President Ali is all over the country, thank you. What a wonderful president. The outcomes are going to be wonderful. And here we are with the numbers staring us in our faces. And when we do the comparative analysis between and among the different sectors, we are seeing that in effect, Guyana is being underdeveloped rather than being developed, even in the presence of oil. And as Young Law says, not because we're a poor country, we are a rich country compared with where we were 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years. We are a rich country compared with our sisters and brothers in the larger and wider Caribbean, certainly the English-speaking Caribbean. What we are yet to do is to convert our richness, our wealth into development. That is the challenge for all countries, in the extent to which you can develop. And we know now that development, economic development, is not just about buying and selling. It's about investing in your people, investing in labor, investing in sectors of the economy where you have comparative advantage or potential comparative advantage. Knowing to take money from high income sectors of the economy and investing in other sectors of the economy. Economics is no longer just buying and sell, what we call in the old days mercantile economics. You know, look at our manufacturing sector. I am ashamed that manufacturing only accounts for 2.3% of GDP. Any student in Economics 101 looking at where the world is headed, and manufacturing is only 2.3% of your GDP, you're in serious trouble. Elson, close us out with something positive, something less depressing. Give us, from your standpoint, how are we going to make this oil work for us as Guyanese in the near term?
Well, thank you. Well, I put it to you this way, and I put it to your viewers this way. There's another world in which Guyana could have never found oil, and we could still be facing all of these inflationary pressures and so on. So we must put it from the perspective that we must be thankful that we were able to be fortunate enough to get oil, and ask ourselves what we can do with this in order to benefit the country in the short and the long term. Now, given that we've got over $1 billion of oil revenues expected this year, it is beyond belief that the University of Guyana, as an example, is still not a free institution. That is beyond belief. Given that we've got over $1 billion this year, much of which, around a third of which, is due to an excess because of a high oil price. So the excess revenue due to the high oil price. Given that we've got that huge amount, it is utterly unbelievable that we have not put anything or much towards cost of living mitigation the way that we really should be putting it towards cost of living mitigation. We on the opposition, however, recognize these problems, recognize these ills, and so we've advocated for several policies to address these things, whether it's bringing down the price at the pump through one of our policies, whether it is bringing down the cost of food through ensuring that transportation costs are reduced with fuel vouchers for canter operators, minibus operators, whether it is grants to farmers to help them to boost production, whether it is an immediate raise to public servants, followed by another raise at the end of the year, We've proposed several solutions because we recognize that this is a time of plenty. And I want your viewers to go away from tonight's having that at the top of their mind. This is a time of plenty. It is a deliberate decision by the government not to help. That is what is going on, a deliberate decision. And so we must put pressure on them. We must put pressure on them to act to help Guyanese. However, on the flip side of it, when it comes to the coalition, you've got, I think, a group of people that recognizes what needs to be done and has recommended policies to address the real challenges facing our nation now and in the future. And you'll continue to see those policies rolled out as we go along and as we head towards an election, whether that's next year, whether that's in the future. And that, I think, is really where people should pin their hopes, because it is, as it stands right now, there's no reason, there's no evidence to support the claim that the PPP cares. There's evidence to support the claim that they don't care. Yeah, someone made a comment there. I can definitely understand that there needs to be more scrutiny in the oil and gas industry. That's something we've spoken about as well, to ensure that there's good governance in the industry. But that's it. You've got one side that is deliberately ignoring the problems, and you've got another side that recognizes it and has put forward solutions. So I would ask citizens to rest their faith in the side that is focused on the solutions and focused on actually addressing the major issues of the day as we go forward. Okay, I think we're waiting on Dr. Hinds to close out the program. Did you?
We're
There,
we are keeping on things. We know the situation is bitter. Young Elson Lowe has been helping us here for the last hour to make sense of what's happening in Guyana. We will continue our commentary tomorrow night. We're having Mr. Aubrey Rettmeyer, once your boss, no? Or one of your bosses, Elson, at Sarah. And we're going to be asking the question, what was the crime of Sarah that the government, in one of his first major acts when it came to power, was to disband Sarah? What did Sarah achieve? And what could Sarah had achieved had it been allowed to operate as best practices demanded? Is there still a role for a Sarah in the present circumstances? I think if you were to run a poll here tonight, it would be 150% that there's a big role for Sarah. But Aubrey Rettmeyer is going to be here tomorrow night. State asset recovery, as I said, Elson worked in that institution, and so he's very familiar with it. So Elson tonight, talking about the economy, and tomorrow night, Aubrey Rettmeyer talking about Sarah. My brother, keep on keeping on. I didn't get to scratch enough out of you tonight because I wanted some numbers to look at the whole notion of the apartness. Apartheid is the word they're using now. And they're telling us apartheid is about laws. Well, I read enough books in school to know that apartheid is also about economics. And the next time I bring you on, I would want some economics of apartheid. Economics, how the economic policies or lack of policies contribute towards the outcome of apartheid. All right? Because I think there is a lot there in the economic policies. But I'll have you back in a couple of weeks, probably sooner than that. So again, good night for helping us out tonight, and keep on growing, keep on shining, and doing us proud as a son of the oppressed who has come back to give of his wisdom and his knowledge to the cause of the oppressed. Big you up. Enough respect. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Always good to be here.
And to you, our faithful listeners, keep on standing with us because we stand with you. Tomorrow night, join us as we look at state asset recovery, as we look at SARA and why they closed down SARA as soon as they come back to power. Big you all up, big yourself up, all of you who came out tonight to be part of the Politics 101 experience. And please make sure that Matty tell Matty that tomorrow night we are